Top 10 waiver wire adds for week 15. It is finally fantasy football playoff time, so as we are looking at waivers, we want a good mix of guys who can give us a spot start this week because of injuries and guys that can hold value through the remainder of the fantasy playoffs. So I've got a really nice mix for you this week because it is win or go home to the loser bracket, that is. So let's go ahead and dive right into my top 10 waiver wire adds this week. Blake Corum was one of my top priority handcuff stashes, and he absolutely had himself a day that screamed maybe he is more than just a handcuff. Now, we shouldn't overreact, but we do have to react appropriately here. The reason that we shouldn't overreact is that he is not actually seeing a big increase in his workload. This is the same workload that he's had. He's just been far more successful with the carries that he's been getting for the past 2 months. Since week 7, Corum has had double-digit carries in 3 games in addition to this week, and he has had a minimum of 7 carries in every game over that time period. So he's very involved. But the difference is, again, productivity with those carries. Instead of 7 carries for 24 yards, it's now 7 carries for 81 yards and a touchdown. Instead of 12 carries for 37 yards, it's now 12 carries for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns. So that's a big jump. Now, it's likely not a coincidence that those 2 big performances came over the past 2 weeks in extremely run-friendly matchups. And Kyren Williams isn't struggling. Aside from heavy usage in the first 3 weeks of the season and then one outlier game, he's typically seen between 12 and 14 carries very consistently. So this volume is fairly normal, and he has been extremely productive with it. Not as productive as Blake Corum over the past 2 games, but excellent yards per carry, efficient at the goal line. There is no issue with Kyren Williams. So again, this is not a backfield takeover. This is a high-end elite handcuff with standalone value that's been in really good matchups. The next couple of weeks, unfortunately, those are the exact opposite of run-friendly, but regardless, we cannot ignore this production. He is on fire. Corum is an extremely high-end handcuff that is a must roster. Achane went down with a rib injury, and because this game was extremely non-competitive, Mike McDaniel claims that Achane was available and he could have returned in an emergency, and that Mike McDaniel chose not to put him back into the game. He said, quote unquote, "I promise you, he will be there if he is ready." That's fuzzy wording. He didn't promise that Achane would play. He said that Achane would play if he's ready. I see what you did there, Mike. So for our purposes, we should move with a little bit of skepticism and prepare for what happens if Achane is injured. Now, if you watch my stash video, I did list Ollie Gordon as the priority handcuff. Snaps and usage have indicated that Gordon would get the nod over Jaylen Wright. But in this game, both of the backs were used, but Jaylen Wright had a massive game with 24 carries for 107 yards and a touchdown. And Gordon had 5 carries for 17 yards and a touchdown. So this is difficult because Gordon has been the more consistent presence since Jaylen Wright came back. But it is possible that he was really just more of a change of pace back because he is just the exact opposite of Achane. And that if Achane goes down, Jaylen Wright is physically the more direct placement for Achane. They're both smaller, speedy backs. Gordon is a big bruising back, not a little speedster there. So I hate to throw away weeks of evidence, but Wright might actually definitely be the better ad here. We need to play this one by ear and prioritize Wright, but be prepared to pivot if Miami announces another strategy in the event that Achane can't play. Dallas played in the Thursday night game, so they've got a little extra time for CeeDee Lamb to clear concussion protocol. Cross your fingers, because I know that I need him. But if he doesn't, Ryan Flournoy is apparently ready and willing to be your fantasy playoff savior. Flournoy had an unbelievable game in week 14 with 9 receptions on 13 targets for 115 yards and a touchdown. And it wasn't just a bunch of volume production. He really did look spectacular. Now, this is not a lock, but I think the secret sauce for Flournoy's success is actually George Pickens, because it takes more than CeeDee Lamb going down. It also takes George Pickens laying an egg for Flournoy to have a boom performance. It has happened twice. This was obviously the second time that Pickens underproduced so bad that he had was beefing with Marshawn Lynch on Instagram. The first time was the Jets, way back when the Jets defense was actually full of all their talent. Pickens was locked down with tougher coverage, and that naturally led to big production from Flournoy. So the question that we have is, can this week's matchup against Minnesota produce the same results as New York and Detroit? It might actually be the perfect matchup for that. Minnesota's defense is very vulnerable in general, but we just saw them clamp down Terry McLaurin, and the week before that, they absolutely shut down Jackson Smith and Jigba, of all people. So it's very possible that we are in for another George Pickens shutdown, and if CeeDee Lamb is out, Ryan Flournoy would be in line for another boom game. Another week, more quarterback injuries. My top waiver wire add at quarterback in a perfect world would be Marcus Mariota. Obviously, Sunday was not exactly pretty, but Mariota gives us exactly what we need in streaming option. Healthy weapons in Terry McLaurin and Deebo Samuel, rushing upside, and a phenomenal matchup against the New York Giants. The problem is that we don't actually know if he's going to start here. The Commanders are claiming that Jayden Daniels was held out as a precaution and that he could have gone back in. Logic says, well, that's your franchise quarterback whose arm was literally sideways a few weeks ago. So you were literally playing for nothing. So you should probably, I don't know, just like shut him down rest of season. He got injured earlier in the season. He got injured again. He got injured again when he had no business being in that game. And then he aggravates an injury again where he had no business being in the game. So just how many times can you push your luck here? Are you really trying to make my man RG3 2.0? My gut tells me that they call it a day on Jayden Daniels and they start Marcus Mariota because that is the right thing to do here. But since there's honestly been a lot of not doing the right thing going on here this season, I can't say with 100% certainty. So yeah, I do have to play it by ear with Mariota and try to figure out what the Commanders are doing. But if Jayden Daniels is out, your top priority for a streaming option is Marcus Mariota. Oh, by the way, not going to leave you hanging there, actually. If Jayden Daniels does end up playing, he should not. But if he does end up playing and Marcus Mariota cannot be an option for us, turn to Tua Tagovailoa in a good matchup, Tyler Shough in a good matchup, or JJ McCarthy. I know, but JJ McCarthy. We talked about Luther Burden in the waiver wire stash video. The production was not fancy. He had a fine performance in a difficult matchup. Rome Odunze, though, that is the key. He is dealing with a foot injury. He did not practice at all last week. He is described as week to week with a stress fracture. It does not sound like they expect him to be available anytime soon. Burden saw a significant jump in snaps to over 70% and had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 67 yards. Again, it was a difficult matchup, so very understandable that he did not have a massive performance. Now, he will be either the first or second look for Caleb Williams, likely rest of season. That makes him a waiver wire add. The only issue that we have here and why he is not the clear number one target here on waivers is that this is just not a good schedule, unfortunately. This week, the Bears face Cleveland, and while Cleveland's defense did randomly fall apart against Tennessee of all teams, they're still a difficult matchup. Then they have another matchup against Green Bay. We just saw the result of that. And then week 17 is a good matchup, finally, against San Francisco. And since they lost to Green Bay, that means that all of their games rest of season are extremely meaningful. So Burden is definitely worth a roster. My apologies on this one. He should have been in the stash video. I had him in the stash video in previous weeks. I did not in this week because honestly, I really assumed that he was higher rostered. But he's still roughly 40% rostered. I would have thought that he would have been grabbed once the Packers announced that he was activated, but he wasn't. So if he's available in your league, you absolutely need to grab him. And you probably don't have to make a big investment into him either because he is not the one that had the big shiny day. It is Christian Watson who is absolutely on fire and looking like the wide receiver one. I'm not questioning that whatsoever. Love my boy there. But Jayden Reed is still worth an add. Reed had a fine day in his return. He caught all four of his targets and they were for 31 yards. Nothing flashy. Good to see. Coming fresh off of IR. Jordan Love had a very productive day. Not a massive volume day because the Packers offense was extremely well balanced. Very nice there. But I think I got enough of evidence here that Romeo Doubs, yet again, poor Romeo Doubs, and I know he's going to be frustrated about it. Unfortunately, he is the odd man out again. And the top 2 receivers here are going to be Christian Watson and Jayden Reed. And the week 15 matchup is not ideal, although in theory, Reed should have the easier coverage between the two. And then in week 16, they've got another matchup against Chicago, followed up by week 17 against Baltimore. So Reed is absolutely worth an add. I listed Kayshon Boutte in the waiver wire stash video. Obviously, he was on a bye, so we don't have any results, but he remains a priority stash here. If he's available on waivers, he's a fantastic option for your roster in the fantasy playoffs, and he can serve as a low-end flex option with legitimate upside and touchdown equity. He is consistently on the field upwards of 70% of snaps. He is not fighting for snaps with anyone. He has been incredibly reliable throughout the entire season, catching 29 of his 38 targets on the season for an impressive 76% catch rate. And he has big, huge, big play touchdown potential there with 6 touchdowns on the season. Yes, 6 touchdowns on the season despite having just 38 targets. He is tied for the 8th most touchdowns on the season this year for wide receivers. And again, of the wide receivers that have had 6 or more touchdowns, he literally has half of the targets than the majority of the receivers. Kayshon Boutte is a player that you can put into your fantasy lineup during the playoffs, and he can realistically give you a top 12 performance. His playoff schedule is okay. It's not super friendly, but it's not that bad. He gets a Buffalo defense this week that just got tore up by T. Higgins. And then he gets a Baltimore defense that just gave DK Metcalf his his season best performance. And then he gets the Jets in championship week. We did a deep dive into Devin Singletary's numbers compared to Tyrone Tracy Jr. in the Waiver Wire Stash video, so I will not make you sit through the entire rundown again. But in short, people are underestimating the value that Singletary offers here. Tracy suffered an injury in week 13, but he said it wasn't serious, and that means that this is not an injury ad. It's an ad for the value that Singletary offers individually in this committee, because the Giants' backfield is a committee. And I fully understand why you want to roster Tyrone Tracy Jr. over Devin Singletary. I'm not questioning that, because you have had a full year of evidence that Tracy was the better back, and he probably is. But since the first game the Giants played without Cam Scatterbo, the majority of games have been Devin Singletary either outproducing or being equal to Tyrone Tracy in fantasy points, with the exception of literally one game. Singletary can do everything that Tracy can do, and Singletary is the one that gets the preference at the goal line. So if you would be willing to roster Tyrone Tracy, you should hold the same view for Devin Singletary. Singletary is absolutely worth a roster, particularly when we are looking at a schedule of Washington, Minnesota, and Las Vegas. That's a great playoff schedule. I was kind of shocked to see that so many people had abandoned Fannin Jr. Very surprised, because usually when you get a rookie, a little diamond in the rough rookie that people want to hold on to, they hold him. They don't let him go. They keep hope alive, a la Ja'Cory Cross-Chimere. Sorry, I had to mention it one time. But Fannin Jr. is under 50% rostered. Yes, he saw a dip in production with Shedeur Sanders at quarterback, because Sanders does not hyper-target tight ends. But it wasn't that big of a dip, and he has clearly separated himself from David Njoku, and his rest of season schedule is good. But Shedeur is getting more comfortable here, and now for 2 weeks in a row, Fannin has had double-digit fantasy performances and a touchdown in each game, and a massive performance in week 14. His upcoming schedule is Chicago, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. Buffalo was a bad matchup for tight ends, but the other two, great matchups. If he is on waivers, absolutely pick him up. At this point, we should not see a change in quarterback, logically, right? So the chemistry will continue to grow. This is a 2-for-1 special because of injury circumstances. Now, before we go into it, yes, Bam Knight was objectively awful in week 14. Terrible matchup. And Knight really hasn't been good on the ground, so this is not surprising. We were not rostering him because we thought this was going to be a game where he pops off. Knight's value comes in checkdowns and touchdowns. He didn't get the touchdown because Michael Wilson hoarded them all. So do not judge based off this performance here. When we talked about this in the Waiver Wire Stash video, again, this is 100% related to my skepticism about Trey Benson and him actually playing again this year. And we will know here real quick. As a matter of fact, you might know by the time this video finds you. So if he is active, hey, ignore this. If not, and we have no news of him being activated, let's talk through it. Emari Demercado was out for the 3rd game in a row here. He did put in limited practices this week, so logically, he should return this week. He put in limited practices last week, so logically, he should return this week. But the logic in Arizona, it often tends to escape them. So both Demercado and Bam Knight do need to be looked at. There are 2 recent games where Emari Demercado and Bam Knight were both healthy. That was week 9 against Dallas and week 10 against Seattle. Week 9, Demercado played 57% of snaps and had 9 carries for 27 yards, no touchdowns, but 2 receptions on 2 targets for 20 yards. And Knight only played 40% of snaps, but he had more carries, 14 carries, 79 yards. In week 10, Knight had 10 carries, 28 yards, just 1 reception on 4 targets. That was on 40% of snaps. And Demercado had 42% of snaps there, so a little bit less. And he had only 4 carries, but he did have 64 yards, and he had 3 receptions on 4 targets for 40 yards. So the evidence shows clearly that more than likely the 2 backs would operate in a committee, with Michael Carter falling to the wayside. They both have receiving upside, but Demercado is simply more productive with it. And then Bam Knight has goal line preference. So I would prioritize Bam Knight by a smidge because I want the guy that is getting the touchdowns and has clear preference at the goal line. But the gap is very slim. And we do need to be aware this week's matchup is awful. But after that, they get 2 top 10 matchups against teams that have scored the top 10 most fantasy points or have allowed the top 10 most fantasy points to running backs this season. So it is worth looking at both of them with a slight favoritism towards Knight. Bonus ad here. I listed this in the waiver wire stash video, so you should already know this if you watched that video all the way through. But if you did not, that's okay, and you're looking for a defense, New Orleans is a defense that you can utilize for the fantasy playoffs. Now, this week was bad. Don't judge me on that. I didn't tell you to start them this week, not at all. I would not tell you to start that defense against Tampa Bay. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the playoff matchups here. New Orleans defense, they're okay. They're average. They get a bad rep for being average, but hey, average is okay when your playoff schedule is Carolina, the Jets, and Tennessee. That is, you literally cannot ask for better than that. Obviously, Carolina can pull themselves together, but we literally just saw this matchup a few weeks ago. The Saints played Carolina in week 10. They had a top 10 performance on defense, generating multiple turnovers. Boom. Then they get a matchup with the Jets that just got a whole lot juicier because of Tyrod Taylor's injury and Justin Fields low-key refusing to play. He will probably be forced to play, but regardless here, really good matchup. And then Tennessee, very turnover-friendly matchup, struggles to produce, so great championship week matchup. Oh, I'm not done. I want to talk a little bit more. Let's do some honorable mentions here. Rapid fire real quick. Jayden Higgins, still a good ad. It was just a tough matchup. Jack Bech. It's been a while since we've talked about him. They're pushing him forward. Maybe Kenny Pickett at quarterback will actually help. This is a very deep ad, a very deep ad. Now, Darren Waller, still a good ad. Mildly concerning that Greg Dulcich got several targets, but ultimately low volume, pass volume in this matchup with Miami leaning heavily on the ground game. Better matchups ahead, so we still feel okay about it. Chimere Dike, back on the table here. Now, I understand what he is, and you understand what he is. High ceiling, negative floor. I wish I was joking. But he ebbs and flows with Cam Ward. So, there we go. Isaiah Likely. Mark Andrews got paid, but Isaiah Likely is getting on the field. And he's being productive with it. And he's occasionally dropping passes, but they're still tossing them to him. Then Colby Parkinson. Low-key an excellent streaming option. And then the Jets receivers. Yeah, unfortunately, Week 14 came down in flames. Quarterback situation, right? Due to quarterback situation, we cannot roster them. But you did see why I said that Mechie might be the better roster between the two because he is just more consistent there. But again, if we don't have Taylor at quarterback, I don't think there's much of a point. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Terror Time, so make sure that you are locked in, subscribe, tune in, notifications. We are closing out the fantasy season strong, and then we are heading into the off season with free agency, rookies, draft, and all that good stuff. Best ball, it's going to be so much fun, guys, so stick around.